Hey everyone, and welcome back to Speak More Fluently. You know, we always love going deep on how to speak better,
Mm-hmm.
and that's exactly what we're doing today.
Right.
So many people struggle
Yeah,
with just feeling comfortable when they're having a conversation.
absolutely.
And it's not always about making grammar mistakes or,
Yeah.
using the wrong words or anything like that. It's
Yeah.
that feeling of like, how do I make this conversation just flow?
Yeah.
So that's what we're diving into today. And hopefully by the end of this deep dive, you'll have some real practical strategies that you can use
Yeah.
literally right away
Right away in your very next conversation.
in your next conversation, no matter who you're talking to.
Yeah, whether it's a
Yeah.
casual chat or a more structured
Right.
business meeting or something.
Yeah. So much of the time when we think about like fluency and speaking, well, we kind of get stuck on the words themselves.
Yeah, for
And
the mechanic.
yeah, it's really about the dynamics.
Absolutely. It's the flow. It's the
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah.
And I think we've all had those conversations where it just clicks.
Yeah.
And we've also had those where it's just like pulling teeth.
Oh, yeah.
So what's the difference?
Right. And I think that's a great place to start because, before we even get into the nitty gritty of the techniques,
Yeah,
I think it is helpful to kind of zoom out
totally.
and think about the bigger picture of conversations in general.
Yeah. Like what's the
Yeah.
context here?
Yeah. What's the purpose?
Are we just, passing the time?
Right.
Are we trying to, build a relationship?
Hmm.
Is this a professional exchange?
Right.
All of these things shape the way we approach a conversation.
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't walk into
Yeah.
like a job interview the same way that you would
Exactly.
chat with your best friend at a coffee shop.
Exactly. And I think sometimes we forget that, there isn't this like one size fits all approach
Right.
to conversation. And,
Yeah.
and recognizing that from the get-go, I think can really help us just kind of be more present
Yeah.
and adaptable in the moment.
And it makes it so much less intimidating, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like if I know
Yeah.
that I can adjust based on who I'm talking to and what we're talking about,
Yeah.
it's not quite as scary as thinking like, oh, I need to
You don't have to be perfect.
be perfect in every single interaction.
Exactly.
Right.
It's about meeting the moment.
And it makes me think, too, about something that, I've always found helpful.
Yeah.
Is that idea of doing a little mental prep
Yeah, I love that.
before conversation.
Like warming up the engine a little bit.
Yeah. And not like, memorizing lines or anything like that,
Yeah.
but more like just kind of having some conversational kindling ready.
Yeah, some topics,
Yeah.
some ideas.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
what are a couple of things that I could bring up?
Yeah.
What are some questions I could ask?
Mhm.
Have you read anything interesting lately? Have you had any interesting experiences?
Right. Or maybe just like reminding yourself of
Yeah.
some of your hobbies or things you're passionate about, because those are always great
Yeah.
conversation starters.
Totally. Because then even if I'm feeling a little bit nervous or unsure of myself,
Yeah.
at least I have a place to start.
It's like a safety net. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, if I just completely blank,
Yeah.
I can always fall back on this.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think this is especially helpful
Oh,
for
yeah.
people who are, speaking in a second language where they might feel
Yeah.
even a little more self-conscious.
Yeah. It's like that extra layer
Yeah.
of comfort and preparedness.
Okay. So we've got a context. We've done a little mental prep.
Yeah.
What's next?
Yeah.
Like, how do we actually...
Well, now we get into the mechanics a little bit.
Yeah.
And one of the most powerful tools we have is the way we ask questions. So often we default to these closed questions that just elicit a yes or a no.
Right.
Which, they have their place.
Yeah.
But if we really want to spark a conversation and keep it going,
Right.
we need to go beyond that.
Yeah. And I think we've all been on the receiving end of like the yes or no question where you're like,
And you just feel stuck.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, well, what do I do now?
Yeah, exactly. So instead of those closed questions, we want to aim for open-ended questions.
Yeah.
Questions that invite the other person to share more,
Right.
to elaborate, to tell their story.
Yeah. And it shows that you're genuinely interested.
Absolutely. It's like you're signaling that you're curious to hear more.
Yeah. So what are some examples of that? Like, how do we actually turn...
Okay, so let's say you're
Yeah.
talking to someone about a movie they saw. Instead of saying, did you enjoy the movie? Which is a perfectly fine question.
Yeah.
But it kind of limits the response.
Yeah.
You could say something like, what stood out to you most about the movie?
Okay. Yeah. That's completely different.
Right. It's like now they have space to talk about
Right.
the plot or the acting or,
Yeah.
the themes or whatever it was that really resonated with them.
Mm-hmm. Or even something as simple as like, are you busy this weekend?
Yeah.
Becomes...
Which, again, is fine.
Yeah.
But what are you planning to do this weekend?
Right.
Now you're inviting them to share their plans.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll find some common ground and you can have a whole conversation.
Right. Or, did you like it? Becomes... What are your thoughts on that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It just opens up so much more space.
Mm-hmm. So we're asking these great open-ended questions.
Yeah.
And then what?
Okay, well, now the other person starts talking.
Right.
And this is where active listening comes in.
And this is such a crucial skill.
Yeah.
Because it's more than just hearing the words.
Right.
It's about fully engaging with the speaker.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, there are a few key things.
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost, eye contact.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds simple,
yeah,
but it makes a world of difference.
Mm-hmm.
When you maintain appropriate eye contact,
right,
you're signaling to the other person that you're present.
Yeah.
You're focused.
Yeah, and it's respectful, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're not looking at your phone.
Right.
You're not distracted by the TV.
Yeah.
You're with them.
Okay, so eye contact.
And then
little things like nodding and smiling can go a long way.
Yeah, like just showing that you're following along.
Yeah, and you're interested.
Yeah.
And again, these might seem like small gestures, but they can really make the speaker feel heard and understood.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we get so caught up in what we're going to say next that we forget to just be present in the moment.
Exactly. It's like we're already composing our response instead of actually listening.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I feel like that happens.
It happens to all of us.
Especially when you're nervous.
Oh, for sure.
Like if I'm in a situation where I'm like, not feeling super comfortable or confident, then I tend to get in my own head and I'm like, overthinking what I'm going to say.
Right. And then you miss half of what the other person is saying.
Yeah.
So being present is so important.
Okay. So eye contact. Nodding, smiling.
Yeah. And then another really powerful technique is to reflect back what you've heard.
Okay.
So you can paraphrase, you can summarize.
Okay.
You can use phrases like, so if I understand correctly, you're saying.
Right.
Or it sounds like.
Yeah.
And this not only helps you make sure you're understanding correctly, but it also shows the speaker that you're really paying attention.
Yeah, like you're not just letting their words go in one ear and out the other.
Exactly. You're processing them.
Okay.
You're engaging with them. And again, it creates that sense of connection, which is really what we're all striving for in conversation.
Totally. So we're asking good questions.
Yeah.
We're actively listening.
We're really in it.
We're in it. What about the words that we're using?
Right.
Like when we're actually speaking.
Okay, so when it's our turn to contribute,
I
think one of the most important things is clarity.
Okay.
Especially if you're speaking in a second language.
Right.
It can be tempting to try to use really complicated vocabulary or grammar.
Yeah.
But often that just leads to confusion.
Yeah, like you're trying so hard to sound impressive that you end up...
And you lose people.
Yeah, you lose people.
So my advice is to keep it simple.
Okay.
Use straightforward language. Avoid jargon. Unless you know the other person understands it.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to just say what you mean in the most direct way possible. And also, it's totally fine to pause to gather your thoughts.
Yeah.
It's much better to take a moment than to rush and say something you don't mean or something that doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is another place where being self-aware can be really helpful.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you know that you tend to get flustered or you tend to speak too quickly when you're nervous, you can consciously remind yourself to slow down, to take a breath, and to think before you speak.
And you can even just say that out loud.
Oh, yeah.
Give me a second to think about that. Or let me try to phrase this better. I mean, you'd be surprised how often people appreciate that.
Yeah, because it shows that you care about communicating effectively. Okay, so we're asking good questions. We're actively listening. We're being clear with our words.
Yeah.
What about the flow of the conversation? Like, how do we...
Okay, so now we're getting into the art of transition.
Okay.
Because we don't want to just be jumping randomly between topics.
Yeah, we want it to feel natural.
Yeah, it should feel like a dance, not like a ping pong match.
Okay.
So one thing that can really help is to use transitional phrases.
Yeah.
These are like little bridges that connect different parts of the conversation. So things like, speaking of that,
Right.
Or that reminds me of, or by the way, have you ever?
And those just sort of...
They create a smooth flow.
Yeah, it's not so abrupt.
Exactly. And another important point here is to not be afraid of pauses.
Okay.
You know, we often feel this pressure to fill every silence with words.
Right.
But sometimes a pause is exactly what's needed. It gives everyone a chance to breathe, to process what's been said, to think about what they want to say next.
Yeah, sometimes I think we're so worried about it being awkward.
Totally.
Yeah.
But silence can be powerful.
Yeah.
It can be a moment of reflection.
Right.
A moment of connection.
Okay, so we're being mindful of the pauses. We're using transitions. Yeah. We're asking good questions. We're actively listening.
Yeah.
We're being clear with our words.
I think we're doing pretty well.
We're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
But we've been talking a lot about the words.
Right.
And I think it's important to remember that communication is so much more than just the words themselves.
It's a whole symphony of signals.
Right.
We've got our body language, our facial expressions, our tone of voice.
Yeah.
All of these things play a role.
Okay. So what are some of the nonverbal cues?
So let's break it down.
Yeah.
So first of all, posture. You know how you hold yourself can convey a lot. Okay. So if you're slouching, it might signal that you're not interested or that you're not confident. Yeah. Whereas if you're standing or sitting up straight, it shows that you're engaged, you're alert, you're present.
Yeah.
Then we have gestures.
Okay.
You know, using your hands can really help to emphasize your points and make you appear more animated and approachable. Yeah. But again, we want to be mindful of, you know, not overdoing it.
Right, like not being too wild.
Right.
Okay.
And then, of course, facial expressions. Yeah. I mean, a smile can go a long way.
Can make you feel more approachable.
It can make you feel more genuine. It can put the other person at ease.
Yeah.
And it can actually make you feel happier, too.
Yeah.
So smiling is a win-win.
Okay, smiling, posture, gestures.
And then the big one, eye contact.
We're back to eye contact.
We're back to eye contact. Yeah. Because it's so important.
Right.
It can convey so much. It can show interest. It can show trust. It can show connection.
But too much eye contact can be creepy.
Right, exactly. So it's all about finding that balance. And it's also important to remember that different cultures have different norms around eye contact.
Right.
So it's always good to be aware of that.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if you're talking to someone and they seem uncomfortable with the amount of eye contact you're making, maybe just ease up a little bit.
Yeah.
It's all about being sensitive to the other person's cues.
Yeah, and it makes me think, too, about all the other cultural differences that can come up in conversation.
Absolutely.
You know, like what's considered polite in one culture might be considered rude in another.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to be open-minded, to be curious.
Yeah.
And to be willing to learn. You know, if you're not sure about something, it's always better to ask than to assume.
Okay. So we've covered so much.
I know it's a lot.
Yeah, but this is really like...
This is the foundation.
Yeah. And I think even if you just implement a few of these things, you'll notice a difference in your conversations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even with our best efforts, misunderstandings can happen, especially when there are language barriers involved.
Yeah. What's the best way to handle those situations?
Well, first of all, don't panic. It's easy to get flustered when you realize that you haven't understood something or that you've been misunderstood. Yeah. But the most important thing is to stay calm. Okay. And to simply ask for clarification. Yeah. So you could say something like, excuse me, could you explain that again? Or, I'm not sure I understood correctly. Could you rephrase that? Yeah. Or what did you mean by... There are so many ways to politely ask for clarification.
And I think it's really helpful to remember that everyone makes mistakes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's part of the learning process.
And especially
with language.
Yeah.
There are going to be bumps along the way. Yeah. So instead of getting embarrassed or frustrated, just view it as an opportunity to learn.
Okay. So we're learning from our mistakes.
Yeah.
What about actively expanding our vocabulary and our language skills through conversations?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Because one of the best ways to learn new words is to hear them in context. Right. So when you're having a conversation and you come across a word you don't know, don't be afraid to ask what it means. Right. You can say something like, excuse me, I'm not familiar with that word. Could you tell me what it means?
Yeah.
Or I've never heard that expression before. What does it mean?
Yeah.
Most people are happy to explain.
Yeah, and I think it makes it much more memorable. And instead of just like looking it up in a dictionary.
Because you're associating it with a real interaction, a real experience.
And I think it's helpful too to maybe keep like a little notebook.
Yes.
Or have like a note on your phone.
Yeah, a note app.
Where you can jot down new words.
And maybe even the sentence that you heard it in.
Right, so that you have that context.
So you remember how it's used.
Okay. Now, I also wanted to touch on
the
role of technology in all of this.
Because we have so many amazing resources at our fingertips now.
Yeah, like language learning apps.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Those are fantastic for practicing conversation, for getting feedback on your pronunciation.
Right.
And they're just really fun and engaging.
Yeah, they gamify it a little bit.
Exactly.
Which makes it less intimidating.
Totally.
Yeah.
And another great resource is online language learning communities.
Okay.
So these are like forums or social media groups where people from all over the world who are learning the same language can connect and practice together.
And get support from each other.
Yeah, it's like a built-in support system.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think that sense of community can be so motivating.
Absolutely.
When you're learning a language.
Because it reminds you that you're not alone.
Yeah.
There are other people going through the same struggles and celebrating the same victories.
Okay, so we've got the apps, we've got the online communities. What about more hands-on practice?
Okay, so if you're looking for more practical, real-world practice, one of the best things you can do is role-playing.
Okay.
So this is where you basically simulate different conversational scenarios. So maybe ordering food at a restaurant, or asking for directions, or introducing yourself to someone. And it might feel a little silly at first, but it's incredibly effective because it helps you to practice those specific phrases and to get comfortable with the flow of the conversation.
Yeah. And I think it can also help to reduce anxiety in real-life situations.
Because you've already done it in a safe environment.
Right.
So it's not as scary.
Nope.
And if you have the opportunity to work with a language partner or a tutor, that can be incredibly helpful because they can give you personalized feedback and help you to identify areas where you can improve.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different techniques.
We have.
But ultimately, I think one of the most important things is having the right mindset.
Absolutely.
Because learning a language can be challenging.
It's going to be frustrating.
Yeah, it can be frustrating.
It can intimidate.
Yeah. So how do we stay motivated?
Well, I think the key is to be kind to yourself.
Okay.
You know, don't beat yourself up when you make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes.
Right.
It's part of the process.
Yeah.
So instead of getting discouraged, view it as a learning opportunity.
Okay.
And celebrate your progress, no matter how small it might seem.
Yeah.
Every little step forward is a victory.
Yeah.
So focus on those wins.
Yeah.
And keep moving forward.
Okay. So we're being kind to ourselves.
Yeah.
We're celebrating our progress.
Yeah.
And as we get more comfortable, are there any other like finesse tips?
Let's call them bonus tips.
Yeah, bonus tips.
All right. So one thing that can really elevate your conversation is to learn how to manage interruptions gracefully. Okay. Because sometimes you need to interject or clarify something, but you don't want to be rude.
Yeah, you don't want to just steamroll the other person.
Yes, exactly. So instead of just interrupting, try using phrases like, just a moment, please.
Right.
Or if I could just finish my thought.
Yeah.
Or may I add something here? These little phrases can make a world of difference.
Okay, so we're managing interruptions politely.
Yeah. And then another great tool is humor.
Okay.
When used appropriately, humor can really lighten the mood, build rapport, and make conversations more enjoyable.
Yeah, but this is definitely one where you need to be sensitive to the other person's culture.
And their personality.
Yeah.
Because what one person finds funny, another person might find offensive.
Totally.
So it's all about reading the room and using your best judgment.
Okay.
And finally, one last tip is to summarize at the end of the conversation.
Okay.
So you can just briefly recap what you've discussed and make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
You can say something like, so to summarize, we talked about X, Y, and Z, and we agreed that.
Right.
Or just to make sure I understood correctly. Yeah. And then paraphrase what you heard.
Yeah.
It just helps to avoid any misunderstandings, and it shows that you've been actively listening.
Yeah, it brings it all together.
Exactly.
Okay, so to recap,